Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Eldred, and I'm with the Center for Best Practices here at Share Our Strengths, No Kid Hungry. Thank you for joining us today for Hunger in Our Schools webinar. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First off, attendees are in listen-only mode, and we will be recording this webinar today. We will take questions at the end of the webinar. Please use the question box for your questions, and we will read them out loud or respond to them individually. The webinar recording and resource links will be sent at a later time this week. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Brian Minter, to start the webinar.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have all of you here, and we really appreciate you taking so much time out of your day to spend some time with us. We will try to be respectful of your time, and hopefully you'll get something out of this call that you can use in your own work. So we're talking today about hunger in our schools, but before I introduce myself and our other guests for today, I want to give a big, hearty thank you to our sponsors, C&S Wholesale Grocers. They are the sponsors, the presenting sponsors of the Hunger in Our Schools report, but C&S is really more than a sponsor. They have a long-time commitment to this work. We've done multiple iterations of this report over the years. C&S has sponsored all of them. They sponsor a lot of our work here at No Kid Hungry, and they really have a genuine and heartfelt commitment to our mission, making sure that every kid gets the food they need. So thank you so much to them, without whom this would literally not be possible. So as Stephanie said, my name is Brian. I'm on our communications team here at No Kid Hungry. Also joining me today is Karen Wong. She's on the research and evaluation team with the Center for Best Practices. And we'll also be joined by Laura Hatch, our Director of National Partnerships. So we are really excited I'm excited to have all my colleagues here today, and we're excited to have all of you on the line. So I'm going to jump right in. We're dividing our call today into three sections. The first section, I'm going to talk just a little bit about what hunger in our schools is, give you a sense for where this information comes from, how you might be able to use it, and what No Kid Hungry's objectives were in launching the project. The meat of the call will be a look at our findings. I'm going to give you the what I would consider the headline, the top-level findings. Those are the stats and the data that we put out into our public channels. And then Karen's going to get a little more in-depth and talk about some of the more detailed findings that actually have not been released publicly. So all of you on the call are the first people ever to get this information. It is exclusive to you. And then last, but certainly not least, Laura's going to talk a little about the idea of schools as nutrition hubs, the program solution that we think some of this research and some of these stories point to. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Hunger in Our Schools is. We just released Hunger in Our Schools. It's a combination of survey research and storytelling, and our goal is to really show viscerally and emotionally and explain how hunger and poverty affects kids and their families. We want to share this with you today, and our hope is that you'll be able to find some uses for this research and these assets in your work. I do want to make it clear that primarily Hunger in Our Schools is a communications tool. When we set out when we crafted the survey and we crafted the focus groups and the storytelling layer of this, we were trying to think, how can we tell the story of our mission? How can we tell the story of childhood hunger in a way that will interest media and a way that will engage our supporters? So I would definitely encourage you to look at this and take this information in through that lens. And if this information can help you with your program work, that's great. But also, I know that all of us on this call have to also think about bringing the public along, bringing our supporters along, bringing our stakeholders along. And as a nonprofit communicator, I believe wholeheartedly that communications is every bit as important to mission work as program work. That's the heart of what we do. So I want everyone to just understand the spirit in which we launched this project and the spirit in which I think these assets will be most useful to you. A quick look at how we gather the data. I won't get real into depth on the methodology, although when we send the deck out to you, you can take a closer look at that if you like. The survey is actually two surveys at the heart of the project. One we call our family survey, and that was a 20-minute survey to 500 low-income households, and at each household we interviewed a parent and a child, a survey that I have learned is called a dyad, which was news to me. And then we supplemented that survey with a series of focus groups. We went to 3 different communities across Maryland, an urban community, a suburban community, and a rural community, and in each of those communities we did a focus group series with parents and with children as well. And then we layered in another survey with educators, and that was just an online survey. In the past, our Hunger in Our Schools research has really focused only on the perspectives of teachers, but as will not come as a surprise to most of you, when we found that over the years, the answers teachers were giving us about their own experiences of seeing hunger in their classrooms weren't really changing a lot. from year to year. So to give kind of a fresh angle on things, we decided to focus a little more on the experiences of children and their families. So Stephanie, the next slide is the methodology. Again, I'm not going to go into depth of this on the call. You can obviously take a closer look at this at your leisure, and later we're going to tell you how you can find the report itself, which has the same information. And Stephanie, the next 2 slides, if you want to click through those, are the demographics of the people answering our questions. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on those, except to point out that for purposes of our survey, we're defining low income as up to 185% of the federal poverty level, and the kids that we're talking about in all these responses are teenagers ages 13 to 18. And that is the educators we spoke with. That's a quick demographic look at, at their roles. Again, mostly teachers. We try to layer in principals and other school staff. So when we say educators, we're really talking about everyone who interacts with children in the school system. So that is the Hunger in Our Schools report in a nutshell, and I'm going to jump right into talking about our findings, which is the exciting part. I've broken these out into sort of some general messages and themes. Again, I think these are ways to talk about this research that I think will be valuable in all of your work. The first idea we have to get across here with you is the fact that kids aren't getting enough to eat. Almost 6 out of 10 parents admitted that in the past year, the food that they bought for their families didn't last, and they didn't have money to buy more. And then another stat that's I feel is really strong is almost a quarter, 23% of low-income parents have been forced to cut the size of their children's meals because of lack of money. That number itself is not as dramatic as some of the others, but the specificity of that, speaking as a parent, that's not something I could imagine doing with my own daughter. So I think that really shows the dramatic need in low-income communities and low-income families. And almost half of parents said that they simply couldn't afford enough food each month to meet their family's needs. And lastly, 34% of parents, a little over a third, said that they struggled to provide nutritious and balanced meals because they simply couldn't afford it. The next message, the next topic we're going to talk about here, the fact that the impact that stress of hunger has on kids and families. 62% of low-income parents worried about food for their children running out before they had the money to buy more, and 35% of kids had the same fear. I know a lot of you get the chance to talk with the families that we are all working to serve. I do get to go to the field sometime, and I will tell you I hear this time and time again from parents that more than anything else they try to hide the situation from their children. But obviously with some of the older children we're talking to here, the parents aren't always successful. Kids know that their parents are worried about it. In fact, over half of children we talked to knew that their parents were worried about being able to afford enough food for the entire family. Kids understand the toll that hunger can take, and this is another one I think is really useful in talking to people because it is the perspective of children. 42% of kids from low-income families, when asked how they felt about not having enough food to eat, said that they felt sadness, and almost the same amount said that they felt anger. I think those are really relatable, understandable emotions, and this is a way I think that is, when you're talking to stakeholders, when you're talking to the public, when you're talking to potential funders, talking about these kind of stats can really give them a sense for not the high-level look at hunger, but how hunger actually affects real kids. And 27% of children from low-income families told us that they thought hunger would have a negative impact on their future. This next slide, we talked a little bit about the idea that low-income families are struggling. This first number, again, one that we really focused a lot on in our social media and in the video series we produced. 64% of low-income parents say it would be difficult to feed their children if they encountered an unexpected expense, like a $1,500 car repair or medical bill. I think this is one that really resonates with a lot of people that we've talked to, because it is, I work for a nonprofit, as do any of you, so a $1,500 bill would not be a pleasant thing for me. In fact, our washing machine died a tragic death recently, and it was a huge cleanup job, and repairing it is going to be about that much, and I am super unhappy about it, but not for a moment did I consider the fact that it would be difficult for me to feed my daughter because of that expense. So I think that's something that a middle-class person can easily relate to and see the gulf between their own life and the life of a working parent or low-income parent. And 92% of the families we surveyed who rely on food programs are working families. At least one adult in the household is working full-time, part-time, or even multiple jobs. And again, when you're making the case that we often need to make to stakeholders, to policymakers, it is useful to be able to counter the misperception that sometimes families who rely on food benefits aren't pulling their own weight, but in fact they are. More than 9 out of 10 of the families we talked to are working, and despite that, they're still facing these struggles. And in addition to talking to kids and families, we talked with teachers. This stat, 3 out of 4 teachers, this is something that we've seen in past versions of reports. Sadly, it hasn't really changed much. 3 out of 4 educators see students who regularly come to school hungry because they're not getting enough to eat at home. And almost half of these teachers, 46%, see hungry students arrive nearly every day. The overwhelming majority of teachers we spoke with told us they were concerned about how hunger is going to impact their students' ability to succeed. And teachers recognize the toll that hunger takes on kids. When their students don't get enough to eat, 80% of teachers see them lose the ability to concentrate, 75% see poor academic performance, 62% see behavioral and discipline problems, and 47% see their students being less healthy. Again, any of you who have talked to teachers will recognize the reality and the truth of some of these numbers. And lastly, teachers are someone that we talk to a lot, and we like to talk about them and their perspectives a lot. They're really, for many people, they are a trusted source, and they're as close as you can get to a really trusted proxy for the experiences of low-income students. 59% of teachers told us they regularly buy food for their students who aren't getting enough at home, and most teachers spend $300 of their own money every year buying food for hungry students. And that, sadly, is another number that we have seen relatively unchanged in the 3 or 4 years we've been asking this question of educators. So I think that's something that, again, a lot of people can really, it's hard for a lot of people maybe to understand 13 million kids are facing hunger, these sort of big impersonal numbers, but when you bring it down to a really ground level, tangible stat like that, it helps make the connection real for people. Oh, so those are all of the, I thought I had one more slide, my apologies. That's all of our, what I would consider our headline level findings. Those are kind of the, telling the big story of hunger and how it affects kids. And I'm going to turn it over now to Karen, who's going to go a little deeper on some of the numbers that might be more useful to some of you on the call today. Karen, all yours.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So as Brian mentioned earlier, I'll be sharing with you all today an exclusive look at what families and educators have to say about school meals programs. So first, we're going to look at what parents have to say about school meals in general. Most parents say it's important their teens have the option to eat school meals. We found that 76% of parents feel that having the option to eat school breakfast is important, and 70% say the option to eat after school meals or snacks at school is important. Moreover, most parents say they are satisfied with the school meal programs that their teen receives. More than 3 in 4 parents are satisfied with school breakfast, school lunch, and after-school meals or snacks offered at their teen's school. Yet, in spite of parents' overall satisfaction with school meal programs, parents do have some concerns about meal quality and portion size. When we ask about school meals in general, 64% of parents say their teens don't like the taste of the school meals, 55% of parents say that the school meals aren't quite filling enough for their teen, and 47% of parents say that school meals are not quite as healthy as those at home. This suggests that there is some room to improve meal quality. So when we looked at school meal participation, we asked both parents and teens how often the teen is participating in school meals. We found that teens are not necessarily eating school meals every day, especially when it comes to school breakfast and after school meals or snacks. Also, while the parent and teen responses are pretty similar, teens tend to report eating school meals slightly less frequently than their parents think they are. So specifically, 62% of parents say their teen eats school breakfast, but only 31% of parents say they always eat it. And when asking teens directly, even less say that they always eat school breakfast. In contrast, not only do more kids eat school lunch, but they're more likely to always eat school lunch every day of the school week. And when it comes to after school meals or snacks, only 27% of parents say their teen gets this at school, and only 6% say their teen always eats after school meals or snacks at school. So the findings on breakfast and after school in particular show that more can be done to increase participation in those programs. So diving more deeply into school breakfast, we asked teens what are the reasons they don't always eat breakfast at school, and they were able to select multiple responses. The most common response is that teens eat breakfast at home. That was true for 47% of teens. The next most common response is that 40% don't like the food at breakfast. And we'll actually dive more into teen opinions on meal quality in some of the future slides. 29% of teens say they aren't hungry. And then also teens say that they're either hanging out with their friends instead or they're not getting to school on time, which could be addressed by breakfast after the bell models. Some of the other responses that were options for teens but got less than 9 less than 10% of teens who said this were that they don't eat breakfast at all. That was 9% of teens. They do homework instead, which is 7%. Other students don't eat 6%, and also their friends don't eat, which was 6%. Finally, we also asked teens about stigma, and we found that it wasn't very frequently reported at all. 88% of teens say that they're rarely or never treated differently because they eat school breakfast. So related to school breakfast participation, we asked teens where breakfast is being served at their school. Most teens said that school breakfast is served in the cafeteria. So we didn't specifically ask about the timing of meal service, but typically when school breakfast is served in the cafeteria, it usually means a traditional model that's happening before the bell rings. So most of these teens are likely not at schools that are serving breakfast after the bell, even though we know these models can increase participation. So we saw that school breakfast participation is influenced in part by whether students say they like the food. And so we asked teens to share more about what they think about the quality of school breakfast. So it turns out that teens actually have more positive attitudes about the quality of school breakfast compared to what we saw earlier in terms of what their parents were saying about the quality of school meals in general. We also found that teens felt more positively about school breakfast than they did about school lunch. That being said, there still is some room for improvement in terms of the school breakfast quality. So we found that 49% of school breakfast eaters say the food looks good, and 48% say it tastes good. We also found that 48% say school breakfast is healthy. So that is better than what teens are saying about school lunch, but still that means there's about half of students who are saying they don't agree that the food looks good, tastes good, or is healthy. An area in which teens do feel like school breakfast falls short of school lunch is that they feel like school breakfast doesn't quite offer as many choices as school lunch. So only 38% of students say school breakfast offers a lot of choices compared to 42% who say that about school lunch. So we also asked teens about food waste at school lunch and breakfast. We found that 58% of teens feel food waste is a problem at school breakfast. That is lower, though, than the percent who say that's true at lunch, which is 63%. We also found that only 55% of teens say they have enough time to eat their school breakfast. And it's possible that that lack of time is also contributing to that food waste. We also found that only 39% of teens who eat school breakfast feel full afterwards. On the next slide, we are moving on to after school. So as you might recall from previous slides showing school meal participation, only a quarter of teens participate in an after-school meal program at their school. So when asked whether or not the school offers after-school meals or snacks, parents and teens had conflicting responses. So 40% of parents say the teen school has an after-school meal program, but only 20% of teens say that's true. And then we also find that 25% of parents and 30% of teens say they're not sure. So this highlights that there's an opportunity to increase the number of schools that operate after-school meal programs, but also to raise awareness among families about whether or not that's even available to ensure that they are participating. We also asked parents and teens about their attitudes towards after-school meal programs at their school. A near majority of parents, 64%, say that an after-school meal program at their school would help their teen. In contrast, only about 1 in 3 teens said that they would be likely to participate. This suggests that more can be done to make after-school meal programs appealing to teens and to make it available and accessible to teens. When asked about why they don't participate, the most common reasons teens gave were that it's not offered at their school, they're not hungry, or they don't like the food being served. We also asked parents and teens about summer meals. Only 20% of parents say that their teen has eaten a summer meal at their school. So there's definitely a need for summer meals at school that's not being met currently. In contrast to the 20% or so of teens that are participating in summer meals, 41% of parents say it's important that they have that option, and 33% of teens also feel like that would be important to them. So again, more can be done to increase the availability of summer meals and to make that appealing and accessible for teens. So we also asked educators about school meal programs at their school, and we found that 2 in 3 say that most or a lot of children at their schools rely on school meals as a significant source of nutrition. Unfortunately, though, slightly less than half say that their school operates breakfast after the bell. And given the problem of hunger that so many educators highlighted, as Brian went over, a lot more schools could adopt breakfast after the bell to help meet their students' food needs. We found that 38% of educators say their school operates a summer meal site, and 47% of those say that it's an open site. More schools could operate open sites for summer meals because this would give more kids an opportunity to eat those summer meals. And we also found that 73% of educators say their school offers after-school activities, but only 49% say they actually offer after-school meals or snacks. For those educators that are at schools that do offer after-school meals or snacks, we found that only 21% say they're operating the umbrella model. The umbrella model means that after-school meals are available to kids who are participating in after-school activities, as well as those that aren't participating in activities. And we found that only 8% say they operate supper in the classroom, which makes after-school meals a natural part of the school day. And so definitely, if more schools can adopt these models, that could increase the number of kids who are able to participate in after-school meals.
Thanks, Karen. Again, thanks to all of you for joining us here this afternoon. We realize that we're throwing a lot of information at you. We're going to send you, as Stephanie mentioned, you'll all get the copy of this deck. So if you're furiously taking notes at your desk, you don't need to. We're going to send this information out to you so that you have it at your fingertips. So I'm going to turn the call now over to my colleague Laura, who's going to talk a little bit about the good news as opposed to some of the bad news that we've been sharing with you for the top part of this half hour.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks everyone for being on today. We want to talk a little bit about the solution and how we can make meals accessible to children and in a trusted place where families feel comfortable going in their community. So we talk about schools as nutrition hubs, and I first want to define what a school nutrition hub actually is. We define it as schools that are operating really all of the available child nutrition programs. So this means breakfast, preferably after the bell as part of the school day, school lunch, after school meals, also known as supper, summer meals, and often, the fresh fruit and vegetable program is being served. And some districts are also offering preschool nutrition programs and other wraparound services depending on the size and scope of their district. So in embarking upon this concept of schools as nutrition hubs, Share Our Strength worked in partnership with the School Nutrition Foundation, also with the support of C&S Wholesale Grocers, to test a theory. And our theory went something like this. We know that school nutrition departments have a specific expertise in feeding children and administering these federal nutrition programs. There's a lot of paperwork and rules and regulations to follow, and school nutrition directors are experts in managing this. We also know that schools are natural places to feed children. Number one, it's where a lot of children already are, so it can be really easy to reach students. And number two, schools are a trusted place for children and families. So families feel really comfortable, going to schools as part of a community program. So our theory was that operating these multiple programs year-round was actually a win-win for both the students receiving the meals and the school nutrition department who were administering these programs. And since school nutrition departments really have to operate as a separate business that is separate from the general education fund, maximizing school meal participation in all programs would actually hopefully boost their operations and really present a nice financial solution to school nutrition departments. So that's kind of was our thinking embarking upon this concept of nutrition hubs. The good news is that our theory was correct. That's always nice. So in partnership with School Nutrition Foundation, we interviewed 8 school nutrition directors who were administering multiple programs year-round and essentially operating as our definition of a nutrition hub. And they really confirmed our belief and mapped out some of the benefits of this year-round model. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that school nutrition directors understand that their number one job in this world is to feed children. That's why they got into this career, and that's really why they get out of bed most mornings. So, this concept of operating multiple programs that reach more children with nutritious meals is a really good thing and resonates with them loud and clear. We also know that children that have consistent access to meals year-round do better in school. So there's a clear link between school breakfast and being ready to learn. In the summer, we know that kids experience less of a summer slide when they have consistent access to meals. And so many school nutrition directors are making that connection with their superintendents and their principals to gain support for expanded operations and to really start operating year-round. The school nutrition directors also told us that expanding programs had a positive impact on their school community as a whole. So the most interesting finding was that increasing these meal programs and expanding to multiple programs actually creates jobs in the school nutrition department. So it can both create new positions and it can also move part-time employees to full-time positions that create access to benefits and additional wages. And if you think about the fact that school nutrition staff live in the community where they work, oftentimes this is a real benefit to the community as a whole. Operating as a nutrition hub can also create an open door for developing new partnerships, both within the school district. We see a lot of great partnerships between nutrition departments and coaches and principals, but also outside the school district within the larger community. So we've seen lots of models where the school nutrition department may be providing the meals and administering the paperwork and some of the more administrative tasks, but the programming for students is actually being run by a community organization like the Y or the Boys and Girls Club. And perhaps another group is helping to build awareness about the program through marketing and events, like United Way does some of this and the Dairy Council does this. So it really broadens the scope of the school nutrition department and how they're able to partner and leverage other community groups across the community and the region. So we can see this as a real community effort. You know, we know that we're focused on the food part of the equation, but knowing that many other components come into play, and so the school can really benefit from some of these outside partnerships. Serving meals year-round can also improve the operational efficiencies of the food service department. So it can increase buying power because they can buy more products and use them across multiple programs. And operating year-round also means that they don't have to start and stop operations that follow the school calendar. They can operate seamlessly. We've heard that a benefit from one of the school districts, they have better retention of employees because they're able to offer 12-month positions rather than having that gap in the middle of the work year. So really, the really important part and the kind of the real win-win is around improved financial success. We know that more meals being served increases federal reimbursements. And so that additional revenue that comes into the school nutrition department can be reinvested back into the program that can continue to benefit students and staff. So it can be reinvested into updating kitchen equipment. It can be invested into professional development for school nutrition staff, implementing farm-to-school programs. There are lots of ways that the additional revenue can be used, and it really all goes back to benefiting that school nutrition department and adding more capacity to do more. That's really exciting. So I won't go into too much detail, although you may be able to tell from my enthusiasm, I could probably talk about this all day. I won't go into too much detail about how to turn a school district into a nutrition hub. We have some resources that Brian will point out that can summarize some of the best practices. We have some case studies, and I'm always happy to talk to folks one-on-one. But as you think about your work in the field, you may be working in a school, you may be a school nutrition director yourself, or working with this great profession on a day-to-day basis. This can be a really great strategy to talk about bringing a win-win solution to the school nutrition space. The 8 nutrition directors that we spoke with as part of our case studies had a lot of the same advice to give in terms of growing these programs and things you need to think about as you embark upon this expansion. Number one is always really identifying champions. We know that some of the school nutrition directors themselves are champions, but really starting with who in the district really wants to champion this expansion. Is it the superintendent? Is it that one really enthusiastic principal? Really kind of start with them and start building the model from there, and it becomes a really great kind of word of mouth, enthusiastic response from there. We also know that all schools have different needs. Realizing that breakfast in the classroom in one school may look different than the breakfast in the classroom in the school just right down the road. So the school nutrition directors really maintain flexibility in implementing these different programs and had to customize sometimes the way that they looked per school building and per needs of that specific location. One piece is really using data to drive decisions was something everyone talked about. So these school nutrition directors have to be not only smart nutrition professionals, but also sometimes business administrators. So looking at their operations from that business perspective, pinpointing where there are growth opportunities, and then troubleshooting issues in real time was really important. And they really engaged their staff in using data and hard numbers to make decisions on a day-to-day basis. And finally, school nutrition directors really operating all of these multiple programs were able to really rise above all of the individual program implementation and look at their program holistically, knowing that some of the financials would not look the same per program. So knowing if maybe they broke even on summer meals, but they were able to increase revenue with supper, that it all really rose up to the same strategy of being able to feed more children, become a really leader in their community, and give them the ability to reinvest in their programs. So to them, operating as a nutrition hub, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that's really important. That's a really important perspective as we look at expanding these meal programs. So I'll turn it over to Brian to wrap up and talk a little bit more about resources, and I'm always happy to serve as a resource on this as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Laura. And I can attest that Laura is indeed very keen to talk about this concept. So if any of you on the call want to get more into it, she is at your disposal. You can talk to her all day long, and she will not lose any excitement for the topic at all. So real quick, before we take questions, I'm going to go over a few resources. As we mentioned earlier, we're going to share this deck with you. There's a lot of information in the deck that will not appear in the Hunger in Our Schools report. But I would love for you all to go check it out. You can find the report online. We made some friendly URLs so you can find it without having to type a million characters. If you go to tiny.cc/HIOS, and I believe that is case sensitive, you'll see the full report. You can also check out a microsite we created, hungerinOurschools.org. And then I particularly want to call up all of you on the call. There's a social media toolkit we created. You can find that at tiny.cc/HIOSkit. And in there, you'll find social media graphics, you'll find social media graphic quotes, and you'll find a video series we put together. All of that is featuring comments from kids and comments from parents, as well as some of the data from the report. And we would love for you to use that in any way that is helpful for you in making the case for why this work is so important to your own stakeholders and your own audiences. You can also find all that information on No Kid Hungry's social media channels, and if you just search for #HungerInOurSchools on Twitter or Facebook, you'll come across quite a few of these videos and infographics. You're more than welcome to share them. We would absolutely encourage that. And then some of the information that Laura was referring to comes from a few different documents. Again, here's a couple of URLs we've got on the screen now. There's a brief and there's a fuller report that goes into some of the research that Laura was talking about FNS directors and the idea of schools as nutrition hubs. And I do want to once again thank C&S Wholesale Grocers. Their sponsorship enabled both of these projects. So we're so grateful to them for making all this work possible. So that's really all we had to share with you today. I really appreciate all of you for joining us. I'm looking over to Stephanie to see if we had any questions for any of our callers or any of our listeners today that we can address.
Yes, we do. I have a question from Leslie on the line. She asked, have you surveyed teachers about their thoughts on after the bell meals? She's heard from many teachers that they don't like it because of the distraction to students and staff alike, and it can cause in the classroom, which makes teaching content difficult. Marissa, would you like to address that?
Sure. Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, I will flag, although we didn't focus too much in this survey specifically on breakfast after the bell, we have in the past in Hunger in Our Schools talked about this, and also have done a number of polls in different capacities with teachers to get their reactions to how they feel about breakfast after the bell. In this version of the survey, we did actually ask for teachers that had experience serving breakfast after the bell, what are some of the benefits that they've seen, and we saw clear majorities with 64% saying that it helps students concentrate throughout the day, 64% saying it helps to improve students' academic performance, 59% saying it leads to healthier students. So teachers we've seen, once they actually have experience with breakfast after the bell, see the benefits and then recognize that connection between the model and it benefiting their students. We see a lot more of the negativity with teachers that don't have experience. A lot of times this depends on how exactly it's framed to them. When administrators get teacher buy-in and allow them to weigh in on actually what breakfast after the bell is going to look like in their school, we see that makes a huge difference in terms of teachers feeling like they bought in and really had a say, and that this isn't just an extra burden that's being put onto their plates.
And, I can absolutely confirm what Marissa's saying. Anecdotally, I do get, as part of my job, to go and meet a lot of teachers, and you hear that, almost invariably you hear that there was nervousness and anxiety before the program launches, and principals share this with us as well, that their teachers aren't sure what it's going to be like. Is it going to be more work for them? But again, time and time again, once the program is launched and it's up and running smoothly, which can take a little while, from school to school, but once that happens, the teachers love it. They don't find that it has a negative effect on their own jobs, and most importantly, they see the effect it has on their kids, the positive effect that it has on their kids.
And related to that, I'll also just add that implementation is so key, and that a lot of times, you need to, like Brian was saying, you need to continue to work to tweak to make it more effective, and not just say, okay, we've implemented, we're good to go, but really working with teachers and to figure out what model is actually going to work really well in the school. And we've heard anecdotally too, some circumstances where teachers say kids are better behaved as a result of breakfast in the classroom, and their classrooms are a lot calmer and more quiet because kids are able to have there's a routine, they get their breakfast, they're well fed, and so a lot of those behavioral problems that they saw as a result of kids being hungry are no longer there.
And one other thing, this isn't quite the question, so I apologize for going off track. One thing we hear a lot of from teachers, an unexpected secondary benefit of these programs is that it creates a real sense of community in the classroom. The children have a chance to meet on equal terms and spend a little time with each other when they're not having to do schoolwork, and that gives the teachers a little time to relate to them as individuals. They don't have to immediately take out their homework. They don't have to immediately go into their normal role of teacher and student. Instead, they're doing this really communal, basic human act of having a meal together, and we've heard from a lot of teachers and students as well that's really important. That creates a really nice atmosphere in the classroom that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Marissa. Quick follow-up question from Nancy. She did ask, did you look at the difference between those who were 47% of schools offering breakfast after the bell and those that didn't?
In this, and I'll let my colleagues on the research team correct me if I go right here, but in this survey we were not differentiating between schools based on the kind of meals programs they had. We were simply looking at schools nationally.
Thank you. Question from the line. Have you looked at any differences in the responses based off of rural versus urban school settings?
Again, we didn't, in this survey, we didn't specifically break out respondents by those. I think that's a fascinating question. I would love to see that. We didn't do that here. We did in the focus groups that we conducted, we did look at those different communities just to see sort of the quality and the tone of the answers we would get and to make sure we were getting a representative diversity of viewpoints, but that's not reflected in the research itself. So great question. Wish we had a better answer for you.
Okay, great. I have another question. How do non-school organizations like community centers fit into the model?
Laura, I'll throw that one to you.
Absolutely. So again, as we talk about community partnerships with schools acting as the nutrition hub and being the administrator of the specific meal programs, particularly for after school and summer, it's critical to make those community partnerships. So community groups can help provide the programming that will draw more students into the meal program, can help build awareness, particularly around summer meals, for where particular meal sites are, letting families know how they can access them, understanding, what the times are, where meals are being served, there are no requirements, and just taking some of the stigma away from, participating in some of the meal programs. So community partnerships and organizations play a critical role. And, we know some community organizations are sponsors of summer meal and after school meals as well. And that's not to say that should be no longer, but just to say that schools can have a particular expertise when it comes to the meals itself, the infrastructure, the kitchen equipment, and understanding the procurement requirements and other rules and regs to follow. So they can oftentimes be the natural source for the food part of it, but knowing those community groups play a critical role in all of the other work that happens to make sure that kids are connected with these meals.
Great, thanks, Laura. I have another question. Did any of the findings surprise you? And I'll open this up to anyone in the room.
Well, I'll tackle that one. I would say that, and that's a great question, I would say that for the most part, no, we weren't really surprised by the findings, and that's sad to have to say that. I think a lot of us on this call work in the nonprofit sector or the education sector, and so we're familiar with the baseline reality for kids and parents from low-income families. I would say that I was looking at some of the commonality of experiences among low-income families and just the sheer, what they have to go through with such a limited amount of resources, and just seeing how prevalent that was for so many people. I would say that really, I don't know if it surprised me, but it really broke my heart. It really made me think once again how important this work is that all of us do, and I know that we're all dedicated to remedying that for children and for families, so that nobody has to go through situations like, no one has to cut the size of their children's meals, no one has to send their son or their daughter to school in the morning without anything to eat.
I don't know if this is surprising so much as interesting, that because of the way that the participation in the meal programs works, and we don't actually know who is participating every single day, we just have, for the most part, general participation statistics. I did think it was really interesting to see some of the differences in the responses in terms of not only who's participating in these different programs, but how many days during the week that they're saying that they're participating. And I think there's a lot more opportunity to get more information about that and explore what's really going on with the variability in participation throughout the week.
At this time, we don't have any additional questions, so we have about 3 minutes left, and just want to open it on up to anyone else who would like to send in questions. Feel free to use the question box.
If you have a question, now is your last opportunity to ask us, but not really, because we're all reachable by phone, by email. You can find us on Facebook. Any way you want to reach out to us, we're happy to talk with any of you at any time. But I don't know if we have any more questions coming in, Stephanie, but I really want to thank again everybody for taking part in today's webinar. We really enjoyed it. We hope it was useful to all of you. We understand that you're all busy, and it means a lot that you're able to take so much time out of your day to spend with us. So we really appreciate it. And I'll put in one last thank you again for CNS. They're really committed to this work, and it means a lot to us that they're willing to back up and support so much of this work. So I think that's everything. Thanks to everyone for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.